Human enhancement. For CuriousU, the summer school of the University of Twente in the Netherlands, I gave a webinar about this topic.
Being able to fly or freeze things by simply touching is something that was inspired by superheroes of the film industry. Dreams of getting superhuman abilities. However, there are people who are trying to make these dreams reality, creating the future human. This raises all kinds of questions, like in what society do we want to live? And what kind of human do you want to be?
Someone who's thought a lot about what kind of human we want to be is Peter Joosten, an expert in the area of biohacking and the future of humans. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Dennis.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you likewise.
Shall we start at the beginning? Because how did you become interested in this topic?
Well, in the presentation, I will also share an example, but something I really am fond of are superheroes. I don't know, do you have a favorite superhero yourself?
Ooh, that's a difficult one to choose. There are so many. No, I can't name one right now.
Yeah, but when I was young, I was really fascinated with Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, that kind of heroes. And that's actually, when I look back, where it all started. And then right now I can, I made it my professional, and also I'm researching it a lot. So, but that's actually where it all started.
Nice, nice. Because you're doing stuff about superhuman, and did you already do some enhancement like that to your own body?
Yes, I call myself a biohacker. So there are a lot of technologies and methods you can use, ranging in minor biohacks to more extreme ones, where I shall elaborate on during my presentation. But one of the things, I think it's not very visible, but I have a tiny implant here in my hand. So I'm partly cyborg, and with the implant, it's a tiny chip, which I use. Right now have my contact information on it. So when we finally are able to meet again each other in live person, you can just have your phone, and then you can scan me, just like I don't know, other things you can scan, and then you have my contact information. So that's a way minor enhancement of my own body.
Wow, that is really cool. Now I'm really looking forward to learn a lot more about this topic, and you're going to tell us about it because you prepared a lecture for us. Yeah. So I would say, please take the stage and take us with you in the world of the future of humans.
I will, Dennis. Thank you for this opportunity. When I was a little boy, I was standing in the bushes, and I could smell fresh mown grass mixed with some dirty mud. And in the distance, I could hear ricochets of gunfire. And here you find me in the midst of one of the most epic battles I have ever been. And there's Richard. Richard, he has red hair, a green uniform, and he looks as ferocious as a Viking. Peter, it's not going very well. You're fat, you're slow, you're useless. I want you out of my army. But Richard, I really try, and you must imagine I'm a kind of superhero, a super soldier. I have bionic feet, just like a ninja, and I have special eyes you could see in the distance. Come on, Peter, you're living in your fantasy world. Right now, this is an important battle we need to win. You go home. Did it ever happen to you that when you were a little child, you had your special capabilities, you still had that fantasy? Well, it was in that moment that it kind of lost on me. But around 25 years later, I got reminded of that scene a lot, because then I think of what are the possibilities to enhance our own body? So you might think for yourself, what kind of superhero did you want to become when you were young? And at the time, I spoke with Richard, and we were playing soldier in the woods. And I did not have a lot of talent to be like a regular soldier, but I had a lot of fantasy. And actually, my favorite superhero was Da, 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 da. So maybe you know him. It's Inspector Gadget. Like Inspector Gadget, he could fly with his propellers from his head, and he had like extended arms and legs. And I thought it was really amazing. And what's also amazing is that we are more, of course, I'm not an Inspector Gadget yet, and it's unknown if we have an Inspector Gadget in 10, 20, 50 years, but I can say that we are using technology more and more to boost, extend, augment, improve, alter our own physical capability and also our mental capabilities. And that's the topic of my small keynote I want to give and to deliver to you right now. And it consists of 3 parts. So let's first dive into the first part. Because the way we look at the human body is also heavily dependent on the dominant technology at that time. Take, for example, the ancient Greeks, if you might remember from your studies. They were also doing a lot with waterways and irrigation and aqueducts. And they also had the so-called law of humoris, which is that the function and the health of your body is also dependent on a balance or disbalance in 4 bodily fluids. So here you can see the resemblance of the aqueducts and also the human body. And the same applies during the Renaissance. They were making watches and working on clocks. And it also led, for example, René Descartes, which you can see on the slide, to think about the inner workings of a brain is just like the inner workings of a clock, with little twists and turns, etc. And even later, during the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we thought that like the constellation of pipes and steam, that's also how the human body should work. And we got sayings from that time, like, I really need to blow some steam. And later during, of course, the introduction of electricity, we got also some sayings from that era, like, oh, there's some energy in the air, or there's a spark between us, or I really need to get rid of my energy. I got too much energy. And of course, what's the era we are living in right now? It's the era of information technology and computer technology. And that's also where the term biohacking originates, because when computer hackers started to hack into computers around the 60s and 70s and 80s of the last century, like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and a whole lot of other computer hackers, they were hacking into the system, but hacking meaning like, can we change the hardware? Can we change the software? Can we add some extra capabilities? Can we improve the processor speed? Can we improve augment our memory function? And the same applies now more and more to the human body. So that's where the term biohacking originates. Can you also look at the human body as a way to add functions, maybe also improve memory or cognition? So that's the fundamentals of the term biohacking. I'm a biohacker myself, as you saw in the introduction with Dennis. I also hacked my own body with a tiny implant. So that's, of course, you can say a form of hacking. But what's interesting is that a lot of these technologies, they originate from healthcare. You can say, for example, having implants, that's not really, can you call that an upgrade? Because, for example, having things, electronic devices in the body, sometimes it's socially acceptable. For example, think of pacemakers or hearing implants, but it's become strange and also ethical dubious when we use the same kind of technologies to upgrade ourselves. And that's the area where I'm interested in. What are some technologies that are formerly used only in healthcare, but then at one moment, a guinea pig or an experimenter, they are looking at the technology or scientific discovery and they think, well, why should I can also use it and maybe in that way extend or upgrade my own function. So there are a lot of technologies, and if you're interested, I also have a website where you can read more about it. It's called superhumantalks.com. But I want to dive in 3 of these. I want to elaborate, give you a deep dive, I should say, on 3 of these technologies. And the first one is pharmaceuticals. And I want to share the story. I hope if you're a student and you're watching this, you have another connotation with these pills. But if you recognize them, they're Viagra. And what's interesting is when Viagra was introduced to the market, it actually was developed for another purpose. It was they thought of it as a pharmaceutical that can help you when you have high blood pressure. But then they found out that the pharmaceutical company Pfizer, that they did not get a lot of their samples back. So they wondered, what is going on? And then they found out that it had other capabilities to increase the potency of the male participants in the study. And this is, as a way you can see, it's a sort of shortcut to improve a certain function of the human body. And we see these kinds of examples more and more because we have more knowledge about neurotransmitters, about how the body is working, that we can also develop better pharmaceutical interventions to alter also with the biological state. You can think of Viagra. Other physical upgrades are EPO or steroids if you want to help your body with growing muscles. So physical is one. Also related to physical upgrades, you can think of some supplements and pills that are now being developed to increase your longevity. So for anti-aging effects, rapamycin, metformin, NAD+ are developed and also now in studies with humans. Another one is where you also can think of boosting or changing or altering your mood. And it's also an example where Prozac or Paxil is being, of course, used in a clinical setting, being prescribed by an MD, but there are also a lot of off-the-counter sales of these kind of products where normal, healthy people, as I should call them, they also want to boost their mood. And the fourth category is where there are pills now being developed to also increase your focus, your memory, and also your concentration. And here, again, you can see the thin line between what's a healthcare application, what's a human upgrade, superhuman augmentation application, because Adderall and Ritalin, they're being developed against ADHD in the United States, but it's also being sold way more to normal healthy people, especially also students and people in college, to also, they say, give their also a boost in their concentration and also their memory. So here you can see, and I think we as humans, we are kind of lazy. So if we have a pill that can maybe help us, so instead of going to the gym more often, maybe we can take steroids. Instead of doing a lot of learning ourselves, maybe we can boost it. We have a shortcut, we have a quick fix. And of course, all these developments are not good for society per se, but I will get into the ethics later. So that's the first technology I wanted to share with you. Another one, this is a story of Malakar Forijek, and he suffers from a certain ailment that he cannot have contact with the sun. At the moment, the sun reaches his skin, it actually turns into malicious moles. So he's really aware and afraid of the sun. And it also led him to, for example, work at the graveyard shift at Denny's while he was a student. So in that way, he can travel to work and from work during the night. So he had to align his whole life around staying away from the sun, almost as sort of a vampire. And then he found out that there were scientists at the University of Tokyo. They were doing studies with on the so-called tardigrade. And tardigrade are a tiny animal. They are about 1.5 millimeters long and 1.2 millimeters, how do you say it? The other way. So really tiny species. And they found out that when they mix them in a lab, of course, with some human cells, and they put X-rays on the cells, the mutated cells with the gene from the tardigrade, they could resist way more X-rays than normal human cells. And then when this guy found out, Malakar, he thought, well, maybe there's the solution. And he volunteered to the scientist in Tokyo, if you need a human guinea pig, a test subject, here I am, because I do not want to live any longer in the condition I'm in. So this technology, of course, in this case, you can discuss about if it's really like a healthcare application or an upgrade application. But there are also people in this domain that are looking at genes. Genes are the building blocks of life. And are there some genes related to intelligence, to muscle growth, to other capabilities we favor in humans, as you might say? And maybe we want to boost these, the function of these genes in people. So that's the second technology I want to discuss with you, genetic modification and altering of the genes. And the third one I want to discuss before I get into the last part, this is Danny Jager. He lives in the northern part of the Netherlands, from the same province where I originate. And Danny has a spiral injury where he cannot move his limbs from around his waist down. And he was one of the first in the Netherlands who financed an exoskeleton. And he now trains with his own exoskeleton 2 times a week. And it helps him, he says, with his posture, but also less back issues, for example. But the most important thing is that he also told me when I interviewed him that he's now with the exoskeleton, he's able to look people in the eye. And that also gave him back his human dignity. But what's interesting here again is that a lot of these exoskeletons, they're really expensive. I know that the University of Twente is also working on exoskeletons, just like the University of Delft, and they also compete every year in a cybathlon. I think not this year because of Corona, but that's really nice, of course, if you can help people like Danny just to regain their sort of their movement and maybe help them in their daily life. It has really a high increase in the quality of his life and also in other patients. But what's interesting here is that there are also companies looking at the same technology, but then to help people, normal, healthy people, I should say, not normal people, but healthy people, to increase their capabilities. For example, Amazon is using exoskeletons, and they put some extra sensors on the vests. So the employees have a better understanding of what is going on around them. But also the American Army and also the Dutch Marine is also using exoskeletons to help people with their physical capabilities. So here you can also see an interesting application. And I think for the coming years, just like with pharmaceuticals and just like with genetic modification, we as society and politicians and ethicists are really on we really are forced to debate the use of this technology. Not I think the technology in itself, but when do we want to use it and for what purposes? And that brings me to my last point before I get back to you, Dennis. That's about the ethics. And let's say there are a lot of arguments on people who say we should use technology to increase, augment, upgrade the human species. And there are also some people who say, oh, not that fast. And on the more critical stance is Michael Sandel. He wrote a really influential piece called The Case Against Perfection, which he made some really interesting arguments. For example, if you now put in all your effort to achieve something. For example, if you're running a 10K and you train a lot and then you hit your PR, that really is really fulfilling. But if you have run really easy with bionic feet and doping, and does it have the same kind of feeling of accomplishment? Probably not. And the second argument, which I think is also really valid, is that he says when we talk about human enhancement or the superhuman or biohacking maybe, in a way you're also then implying that the current human is in a way not good enough. So I think that's an interesting argument. Why should we upgrade ourselves? Isn't the way we are just as we should be. And these kinds of discussions is really more, it's not really a technical discussion. It's more about human values. It's more about politics. It's more about what do we want as society. So on the other kind of the spectrum, not that you might recognize him, especially if you're a student at Enschede, this Professor Peter Paul Verbeek, and I had the honor to be in a podcast series with him. It's in Dutch, in 2018 by BNR and the Financial Dagblad, so the Financial Times in the Netherlands. And we had a lot of discussions and debates and conversations during this podcast. And what I really stuck with me is that his stance, so I hope I have the right interpretation, is that the use of technology is also something that makes us human, that we are doing that for ages, that compared to other species, that we can use technology and also cooperate with each other. That is also what makes us human. So you see both kind of arguments resolving around the same kind of question, which is a really old question. What is it to be human? And maybe the question for the future is, with all these technologies that are available or becoming available in the coming years and decades, and maybe millennia, I think the question is more about what kind of humans do we want to be, and what kind of human do you want to be?
Thank you, Peter. That was really, really interesting to listen about. And you also talked a bit about that things we're not able to do in the global pandemic right now. And we are in a global pandemic. And as a biohacker, how do you see the whole situation? Do you think the future human will be able to adapt to something like that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hope that the future human will be more robust, looking at like our own capabilities. But when I look at biohacking, I do not see real, real changes or capabilities. One interesting thing that I see is that there are also some biohackers all around the world which are looking at how can they develop their own vaccine, so a sort of do-it-yourself vaccine. So the field of biohacking is also closely related to the open source, more of like that kind of movement. So I see developments where people say, well, the development of such a vaccine shouldn't be only at the hands of scientists or big pharmaceutical companies or biotechnology companies, but it should be for everybody all around the world. So I see some interesting developments there. I'm a little bit skeptical if these things are going to work out. Like, if there is a do-it-yourself vaccine, I mean, do you want to try it? I'm not sure. There's also a reason that this industry is also heavily regulated. I mean, it's about everybody's health. But on the other hand, I think it's also an interesting concept that you say, well, these kinds of technologies should be not only be available for certain groups, but it should be openly available and widely spread.
Yeah, because, well, in your book I've been reading a bit on, and you talk about the next species. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's of course pretty fictional. So I do not say I have like a glass, how you say, crystal ball where I can see the future of our species. But what I can say is that we are using a lot of technologies ourselves, and maybe if you're born around 100 before Christ, and you're kind of with a teleport machine, you're landing here in 2020, you think, well, of course, we have all these things and houses and cars and the internet and phones, but humans, I think you can still recognize humans. So it's also interesting to say at what time scale would there be a future species. But one of the most, I say, interesting views in this domain is that there are people who are saying, we cannot stay on this planet forever. So just like Elon Musk and some other thinkers and visionaries and entrepreneurs, they say at one time, also because I think the sun is becoming too hot at a certain time in the future, but it's way, way, way out. We have to leave this planet as a human species. But at the same time, our body, it's not really optimized for space, as you might say. We are also evolved, and we've grown up with gravity and all these kinds of things. So there are also people that are really on the far edges of scientific research. They are looking at what are some genetic changes that we as humans can better survive in outer space. And they're, for example, looking at the tardigrade gene, where I talked about, because in space there's also a lot more radiation. So that also leads some experts in this field, like Lord Martin Rees, to say, well, it's very unlikely that we have like radical improvement or development of new species here on Earth. But it is possible that like the new pioneers that really go to other worlds, they can develop in sort of other species that are related to us, Homo sapiens, but also maybe develop in something distant.
Wow. That sounds really cool. So we would have like a spread out species of us. That would be really interesting to monitor, like how people would develop in other scenarios and situations.
Yeah, there also are some interesting science fiction books written about this concept. So if people are interested, I really like the work of Seven Eves by Neil Stephenson, for example.
That's a good tip.
A summer reading tip. Summer holiday reading. Yeah.
I think people have time to do that. Or I hope so, at least. Let's shift topic a bit, because there was some great controversy about a particular case in China of changing the DNA to protect 2 newborn babies against HIV. From a perspective of a biohacker, what do you think about that?
First and foremost, I was like, whoa, this is really fast. Because I followed this domain as a biohacker and also as a science journalist, and I saw the potential of CRISPR-Cas9, which is the method for genetic modification, which is also compared to other technologies. It is more efficient and more safe and also cheaper, but it's not perfect. Like if you're doing genetic modification, it's not like you have a 100% hit every time. You also have the so-called off-target symptoms. So I was thinking, well, what would be the next step, and when would it happen? And what's interesting, I talked about it with Professor Sjoerd Repping from the Amsterdam Medical Center. And he also made the remark, well, I did this expect to happen, but not that fast. So it was pretty fast. And I also think that that the scientists wanted to, sort of expected to be in the center line of all the attention, and that he was really like celebrated as a hero. But the response from the world and politicians and bioethicists was a whole lot of different. So I think that we have to be very deliberate and also really think about and debate it, and then before it gets into laws and regulations, and what are the cases in which we want to use this kind of technology. So like when you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said, well, of course everybody should be in a position to use this kind of science like CRISPR, and why shouldn't you CRISPR on yourself, like the Malakar example I gave. But more and more I realize we are not sure like how these things are going to play out in these little babies, and maybe they change a gene which has an effect on their health, but not like in the beginning, but when they're 18 or 20. So I think, although I'm really fascinated, I think we need to go a little bit slower with the use of this technology.
Mm-hmm. Because you said the responses, and in your book you also talk about the responses of other institutes, and especially that they were jealous. And then would you then say that this is kind of some kind of race, like the space race or the nuclear race we had in the past?
Yeah, I should say like it's not real. It's more speculation. But I talked about it with some other people who follow this field, and they say, well, that a lot of response from other colleague scientists might be also involved with a sort of jealousy, because at the time also sometimes scientists at Harvard were looking at maybe also with changing the sperm cells of a man, that they can have the same kind of effects, for example. But on a grander scale, and I think that's also something where I know that University of Twente is doing a lot of work. It also has an influence on, like you say, not like on the economic kind of scale, and especially when we look at genetics and genetic modification. China is growing pretty fast with sequencing a lot of genomes, not only from humans, but also from animals. I also saw a fascinating documentary, which I forgot about the name. Oh, that's really stupid. But it's about the initiatives of bringing back the holy mammoth to Siberia. It's, it's a Genesis 2.0. So I already gave a tip about a book to read, but it's a documentary to watch. So here you see like, sort of a race where I must be clear that scientists most of the time they want to do good. But most of the time they're not, that's also where I know the University of Twente is from. The students there, they're also thinking about, okay, if you use the technology for this kind of thing, what other kind of consequences, like second order or third order consequences, will it have? So that's what I want to say, that the scientists in China and the EU and also United States, they're not thinking about building a superhuman race or not, of course not, but it can be a sort of effect of all the individual work they are doing just to help people get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, well, in the first episode, we talked about the main mission of the university is not maybe technology, but to improve the life of others. And actually, as you say, this is also a way to improve the life of other people. Maybe not intended, but it does somehow affect that. That's because you say, well, we might with these all small initiatives change the humans, and this is also a key topic of this discussion. What will be the impact on society then if we change humans around us?
Yeah, that's a great question. A question that comes up a lot. And there are also some ideas about how this will impact our society. It can be that the use of these kind of technology become like a sort of norm. It can also lead to like the way you treat your mobile phone, for example, like, oh, I need an update, or I want another brand. And like with the use of these consumables, I think that's, at least in our capitalistic society, that's pretty accepted. But of course, it changes when you are talking in the same way about implants. Like, oh, Dennis, you're not having like the bionic arm from 5 years ago. Oh, you're old school. Ah. So that's also a thing that could happen. And related to that, that's also something that Yuval Noah Harari is also written about. Probably you know this book. It's called Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. And he also wrote, well, it could be that they're, especially the rich people or the people who are also willing, but like I said, also able to buy these upgrades. They become like more godlike kind of humans. And there's an economic difference or a social difference between certain groups in society. And he warns, well, what if this can happen? It could also lead to a biological difference where people who have the money, they buy these technologies, they live longer, they are more intelligent, they are stronger. And I think that's not a path we should go as a species.